Welcome to ABA On Call. Join myself, Rick Kubina.
Behavior analysis is a science of behavior.
And Doug Kostewicz.
Focus on the individual, and you're going to see focus on behavior.
For thought-provoking conversation. Hey everybody, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we will tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over.
Hello everyone and welcome back to ABA On Call. We are starting fresh for 2022, so that means we are now in season 4 and this is episode 1. Doug, where has the time gone?
It usually has gone into the past. From what I understand, just now it went to the past. So that's probably where it's gone.
Yeah. We got a lot of changes.
Yes.
One, for those of you who are watching us online, you'll notice we dropped our screens and you could see all of the cool things behind us, which means you're going to see my love of comic books. I got a bunch of statues and posters in this room, and that's just who I am.
And my love of neutral paint.
Right. So with a little contrast there.
There we go.
But we still have all of the ABA goodness that's coming at you, and today is going to be no different. Our kickoff episode is a question that maybe some of you have had. Doug and I have talked about this before. Back in graduate school, you may have come across this topic. But the question is, what is ABA and its relation to psychology? And I should point out, when I say ABA, and we're using that just generally speaking. I know when we talk about behavior analysis, that's the science of behavior. That encompasses everything. You have ABA, you have experimental analysis, but we're just using ABA when that very commonly. And of course, we do talk to many people who are practitioners, which is you. So, Doug, let's start off talking about ABA and psychology.
Well, I think first and foremost, psychology has a longer history than behavior analysis, or ABA as we're going to use it. So I think that's partly why more people are familiar or comfortable. It's been more accepted, and so it has that longer history. And it emanated probably from that study of the mind, right?
Yeah.
And that primary distinction was moved, behavior analysis moved away. It was no longer looking at it as that insubstantial mind, but looking at then objective measurable behaviors and that within the environment. So it's taking it more from a measurable rather than an insubstantial place. And I think that's probably the primary distinction between the two.
Yeah. If we could spend this entire first section just talking about the history of psychology, and the psychologists, if we go back to Wundt, which was the 1890s maybe, don't quote me on that date, but his introspection was exactly what you're talking about. How do you look into the mind and try to quantify something and come up with subject matter? So I did want to bring something up, Doug, and I have a psychology book, a very popular introduction to psychology. I want to read the definition. Now, they have a whole chapter on psychology, so in terms of this text, they really try to go in and explain the nuances behind what do they mean by psychology. But I'll just read a little bit, and they say in the very first page, this is how they define psychology: the systematic study of behavior and experience. The word experience lets us discuss your perceptions without implying that the mind exists independently of your body. So right away, This is a broad definition. We can talk about behavior experience, but they go right to the mind. And this is part of the causality of psychology. It always has been that way, and it still is to this day.
And I think that comes from we've judged ourselves over. We're trying to understand humans, and even in the definition, it talks about behavior and understanding behavior. But more importantly, psychology is trying to understand mostly emanating from humans. So we've differentiated for many people that we're different than animals, so there must be something special. So it sends us towards that. Well, then we have to have something special. So it's where is this mind? And I think that they both, behavior analysis and psychology, start with the notion of behavior, but it's coming at it from that very distinctive difference. And that is so very important to highlight that, because while it may look the same way at the end in some kind of implementation of a treatment, it's really emanating from a very different spot.
Yeah. Psychology has always been about the mind in general, and many people have tried to figure it out, but it gets to causality. Why do people do what they do? And as you pointed out, we don't need to talk about animal psychology. Let's just focus on people. And why is it that people do what they do? What are the causal determinants of behavior? And if you are trying to figure out how this the mind-body relationship or the brain base and all of these different ways of trying to figure it out, that's going to lead you down a certain path, which has been psychology's path for years.
And that causal agent, and I'm using we more generally, but we don't want to give it to something else. So it led us to initially within that field, psychology, well, it's got to come from me, versus the causality of behavior analysis, looking to the environment that dictates behavior. So that is that big distinction right there.
Yeah. Let me read one more thing to you, Doug, and our listeners. This is on the same page, and it's under the category, it depends. They're talking about general points about psychology. Hardly anything is true about behavior of all people all the time. Almost every aspect of behavior depends on age. Infants differ from children, who differ from young adults, who differ from old adults. Behavior also varies with people's genetics, health, past experiences, and whether they are currently awake or asleep. In some ways, behavior differs between males and females, or from culture to another. Some aspects depend on the time of day, the temperature of the room, and how recently someone ate. How someone answers a question depends on the exact wording of the question, the wording of the previous question, so on and so on. So that section in how they think about behavior, that it's incredibly varied and that there's no, commonality or structure. Thinking about the mind, thinking about how they're approaching behavior, like, yes, there's true variability, but this is very different from what our understanding of behavior is. So, I want to react to this statement, but I don't know if it was helpful to just react to it or start describing what behavior analysis is and how we approach causality.
So what I thought, my reaction to you reading that, was the exact explanation I would use if I was talking to someone about why is someone doing what they're doing. I would be looking to all the factors that you just mentioned, not as an explanation of, well, that's just variance. That is the most important aspect as defining why is that person doing what they're doing. And even in behavior analysis, like they said, we deal in probability. We don't deal in absolutes. But all those factors come into play, and why that variance is there is because of where the causality of behavior emanates from, right? It's the environment. It's all the temperature, when you last ate. We're just talking about aspects of behavior analysis there. So that's my reaction to it. I don't know if that's where you wanted to go with it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too when I read this. Our science, what was different about Skinner and almost everyone else who has a school of thought in psychology is Skinner, like everyone tried to deconstruct behavior from looking at people. Like Freud, what did he do? He had his psychosexual stages. You go back to Watson and all these people. So he looked at people and tried to deconstruct it. Whereas Skinner, rather than create a theory, he went to the laboratory, he applied hardcore science, made these observations, and inductively discovered these principles that we understand now are laws of behavior and govern why people do what they do, at least most of the time. I mean, we have different kinds of behavior. We're talking about operant behavior. We're not talking about respondent behavior. That's different. But what you said is exactly right. So we look at behavior in causality coming from the environment. We all are the locus of our genetics in the environment, and you can add whatever else you want onto that. We have these histories. So everything in there, while we have variability, we have incredible predictability. So when they said hardly anything is true about behavior of all people of all time, I'm thinking about reinforcement. That's going to work for all people at all time.
What it looks like is different. Yeah. What the actual stimulus is different, whether it's removed or the behavior removes it, negative reinforcement, or the escape, or it's applied. Reinforcement, if it's in place, you're going to be doing something more often. You're going to be doing something stronger. You're going to be doing something louder. So, it's interesting to look at that way as well.
Yeah. Behavior analysis is a science of behavior. And I think we need to come back to that. And when we say, there is a group which you are aware of called Behaviorology. They're still out there. They were, I haven't followed them for a while, but I know they were very active in the past. And some people in behaviorology thought we should remove behavior analysis from psychology because psychology is the science of the mind, so to speak, which is kind of oxymoronic when you think about it. You can't have a science of the mind because the mind is this construct that people make up. But clearly, ABA or behavior analysis is part of psychology.
And you saw in the first statement, right? Study of behavior. And when you gave that definition, behavior's there. And so that's what we're focused on. We just, again, change what we're looking at. Okay, the first secret word for everyone out there listening is Skinner. Now, we've got a clear picture that psychology and behavior analysis, while behavior analysis is in psychology, there's a lot of differences between the two. I think we should talk a little bit about sort of numbers. So I mentioned earlier that, psychology's been around a little bit longer. How many people are doing these things? And what's some of the research popular research or popular topics that we see? And when you look at this, APA presented some numbers which is the American Psychological Association. As of 2017, there were 117,000 members to the association, and there was about 100,000 licensed psychologists in the United States. Within behavior analysis, ABAI is arguably the flagship association. As of a few years ago, there appears like there's about 9,000 members with an additional 20,000 members in sort of the local organizations. And most recent numbers for BCBAs are 54,000 in relation to the licensed psychologists. Now, there are lower levels, so there's another 5,000 BCABAs and another 110,000 RBTs. So you can see that some of those numbers are similar, but if you went back a few years, there were a lot fewer BCBAs than there are now.
Yeah, and I'd also, wonder with like ABA, you have marriage and family,
Mm-hmm.
and all MFCCs, all of these people who maybe also are part of APA who are therapists, like counseling psychologists and all these other folks. So psychology certainly has a lot more people, but our field has been exploding and continues to grow unbelievably.
Yeah. So, and that doesn't appear like it's stopping. I mean, it is going up and up. Now, one thing I will say, I think that the requirements to be a licensed psychologist is a lot more. So that's than a BCBA as a master's versus, I think, a Ph.D. But you've got a response cost there that may be keeping one a little bit lower. But still, the notion the psychology covers more, and there are more areas of it. I think that's, like you said, part of the explanation of why there's more, right? There's more schools of thought.
Yeah. Well, why don't we let's look at this a little more deeply, and we'll put this in the show notes, but we have a link that shows the top 10 lists of the most downloaded articles in psychology. This is from APA in 2021. So, Doug, what jumped out at you when you were looking at this list?
Just looking at big words, obviously COVID.
Yes.
Right. You see social media. I mean, that is a popular topic. You see things like emotional, what's the word I'm looking for there?
Regulation,
emotional
adjustment.
Yeah. Motivation, emotional intelligence, different things related that you would obviously relate to psychology. General anxiety disorders is one of the ones that I saw. So you see the sort of the popular topics. Fatigue associated with Zoom is another one. So you see very psychology topics.
Yeah. These are, it's interesting looking at this list. As you said, what are events that all of us have been experiencing this past year? Social media, they talk about Instagram and how that affects people's body image. They talk about Zoom fatigue. And these are like the top articles that people are downloading. So people do studies on this. And if we were going to compare and contrast that with behavior analysis, I have, now I couldn't find a top 10 downloaded from Java or JAB, but I did just pull up volume 54, issue 4, which is fall of 2021. And going through this and looking at some of the research articles, what you find is, here's an article on improving pretend play for children with autism, promoting emergence of tacting 3-digit numerals with matrix training. So that's looking at some maybe verbal behavior, looking at stereotypy. Here's another article on evaluating function of social interaction for autism. Another one on comparing two teaching procedures for generalized infraverbal tacting for children with autism. We have a lot of articles on autism, which coincides with part of the explosive growth of ABA. Right. Since you and I have been around for a while, and we won't bore you with all I remember when ABA was blah, blah, blah. But
yeah, we walked uphill both ways to the conference, right?
It certainly has changed when you've been in the field for a while. And I still remember when no states were offering insurance coverage for ABA. But now that all 50 states have coverage, and those CPT codes are are permanent and established, and ABA is medically necessary, and many people can get funded and help folks. It has just driven this incredible rate of growth in the RBTs and the BACBA. I said that wrong. The BCBAs and all of these folks, and obviously our journals are going to reflect that. Yeah. So while I believe, and this is again not probably a fair comparison because I'm just looking at one article. We do have other articles where we talk about COVID and some of these other things, but nowhere near what psychology is doing.
Well, I want to also highlight something that just popped into my head as the focus of the articles that you read, and I can arguably say that if we went back through the last few years of JABA or most behavior analysis, you're going to see focus on the individual, and you're going to see focus on behavior. And that is a big difference from the majority of the psychology articles, where it's focused on behavior, but more of many, the behavior of many, and rather than the behavior of a few, and looking at very objective measures of behavior.
That is such a good point. The fact that even a lot of those studies, you know how they're done? You whip up a survey, you send it out to some list, you get 2,000 respondents, and then you say, oh, look what we've discovered. Whereas when we're doing our science, we are working with a few individuals. We are carefully examining the environment. We're putting up all these controls. We're using this experimental design, and we're trying to understand how does this variable impact this variable? Now, that doesn't mean that psychology doesn't have their own way of doing experiments. They do, but they're more likely not going to be doing single case. They'll be using some kind of inferential statistics where maybe they have one group versus another group. You pre-test them, then you post-test them. You run a stats test. If there's a significant difference, you share your findings with the world.
And that is in no way, shape, or form to say that one is just blanketly better than the other. That is, they're different. They're asking different questions. They're rooted mostly in the definitions that, or the characteristics that we talked about in the first section. So our research methods align, and I use ours. I'm on a behavior analysis team now. Our methods align with the goals of our science and their methods are trying to get at the things that identify them as their science, the study of the mind.
Yeah, and certainly, in our, well, I don't want to give away our next section, but certainly the things that you talked about are very relevant to understanding the differences between when we have evidence, what does that evidence mean, and how can we come to understand it. But with that being said, let me share the next secret word, which is,
oh my goodness,
statistics.
All right, Rick. So we've got behavior analysis, we've got psychology, and based on the numbers, based on the popularity, based on we're working in the same fields, working with the same clients, behavior analysis, ABA, BCBAs, we're going to interact with psychologists, right? There's going to be an interaction. You cannot, as a behavior analyst, shut the door, ignore everything else, because you're going to be working for the best interests of your clients. You're going to be working towards making gains and helping people. And that's the goal. A lot of psychology is the same. The goals are the same, but we've talked about the differences. So what should we be doing here, Rick?
Yeah, we can probably title this section Playing Nice in the Sandbox. When you were saying, you can't, I know people that do do that, where they say, you know what, we have the field. I'm not going to listen to speech and language pathologists. I'm not going to listen to OTs. I'm not going to listen to the clinical psychologists because we know it all. And that can be a problem if you're operating that way. And you are going to interact with people. And not only that, you're also going to have information that comes to you. And as consumers of knowledge and information, what do you do? How do you make sense of that? And that's a really important topic. And you and I have read books before on psychology and different topics, and we've discussed that, and they've been fascinating works. And I think that's one way to start. Let's break this down into two sections. Number one, how do you deal with the information? Number two, how do you interact with folks? So let's start off with how you deal with information. So one book you and I read, and we've read many. We have our own little book club through the years where we just read stuff and talk about it. And we read a book by Carol Dweck, who is a famous psychologist, and she talked about cognitive dissonance. And for those of you who haven't heard this term, cognitive dissonance means you have these thoughts or feelings or beliefs that are inconsistent with some decisions you made. And the more inconsistent they were, this dissonance is supposed to be something that's painful and something that is very hard for you to reconcile. So this is a concept, a theory, and there have been books we read about and many articles, and this is something that there's lots of evidence behind it. So what do you make of that evidence? Should we just say, well, this comes from psychologists, it's done with group statistics, let's just forget it, it's a bunch of bunk?
Well, there's a few ways to go about it. You could try to define some of these. You could try to translate it, right? You could try to understand what's going on, understand whatever the phenomenon, the measure, whatever they're calling, and do your best to translate that to behavior analysis, right? Translate that to what's going on and look at the contingencies that are involved. And that, I think, is a general statement for any kind of intervention, regardless of cognitive dissonance, popularity, or anything, is I always find myself translating what I'm hearing and trying to put it into a behavioral model, which then I can try to translate back to something that can get things done. Oh, that was the second part. But translating into a behavioral model to provide additional understanding that probably something behavioral is going on, but it just might be named something different.
Yeah. I remember when we read that book, there was, they were talking about a study where they looked at prosecutors, and the prosecutors put people away for years. And then they do genetic testing and find out you put the wrong person away.
Right.
And the notion with cognitive dissonance is that's so painful to reconcile that because of your aggressive tactics or you made the wrong decision, that this person lost years of their life because of something that you had your hand in. And the prosecutors, even when given that information, they absolutely refused to believe it. They had all of these other reasons for, well, that was just the wrong test, or, that test wasn't right, or whatever. They just flatly refused to believe it. So that is something, you can find that happening in people many times. And so if you do studies on that, I truly believe that, yes, that's a painful phenomena. And the notion is, well, cognitive dissonance, this is why it's happening. But behaviorally, is that why it's happening? Is it because of these thoughts and they're conflicting inside your mind, and then you have that? Is that the reason that we're accounting for that person's behavior?
No.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Right.
I mean, we could try to diagnose. You could look at verbal behavior. You could look at individuals' history of reinforcement. I mean, you could describe that in a variety of different ways. It's easy when it's generally lumped. It's easy to say that, oh, that was cognitive, that was cognitive. When in essence, you need to come back and look at the individual as to why that's going on. Because some people, some prosecutors may have a learning history. I put people away, and they may come out and say, wow, I'm so glad that the new evidence came out. Let's let them out. And you know what? Hold me accountable.
Yeah.
Right? So there are people that would do that. That would be a situation that, quote unquote, cognitively should be happening, but it's not, because that individual behaves under that environment differently than whatever the other person is doing. So yes, you can see how we can take these techniques, these naming of certain phenomena, and explain it behaviorally. We don't necessarily need to go up in their face, meaning
Right.
the people that did it, and explain it, but we can make sense of it for us.
I remember listening to Jack Michael in the past, and he said when he first became a behavior analyst, one of the most valuable activities for him was translating psychological concepts into behavior analysis. He talked about how that made him a better behavior analyst. Now, with that, that brings us to the second point. If you're on a team and you have psychologists who are maybe you're working with someone who has autism, and maybe you're working with a clinical psychologist who gave an intelligence test, who maybe gave a battery of tests and is talking about the findings. Well, how do you interact with folks on the team that may have a different perspective from you?
Well, I'll say, first of all, the environment will start to shape your verbal behavior in such a ways as to get things done. So, we've always joked. I remember a conversation you and I had that we would run into people that were so staunchly behavioral and they couldn't say anything other than behavior analysis. We both laughed and said, they're never getting anything done in the world. You're just not. You can't run up to someone and start throwing EOs and SDs at them and get things done. So the environment will start to shape that. I think it comes back to the first part. You need to understand where they're coming from, be able to translate that, and then turn it back to understanding so that you can talk a language that will make the best decisions or the best techniques for the clients or the individuals that you're working with, or for yourself, if you understand. Because what we didn't say here is you can't hide from this. If you have a parent, they look online and then they come to you, well, why don't you use this technique? You can't just say, no, we're not going to do that, because people are out there saying it works. So you have to be ready to, no, you can't know everything, but you have to be ready to be comfortable trying to translate and then get things done.
Yeah. Whatever dynamics are on your team, and whether that's interacting with a parent, a fellow professional, being gracious and humble. We don't know it all. And other people can have some really excellent perspectives. Even though their theoretical background is different from ours, doesn't mean they can't observe behavior really well and come up with insights. So playing nice with others, I think, is always the answer, and not being the bull in the china shop and charging in and trying to convert the entire team to behavior analysis. Now, if you had people that wanted to learn more about your perspective, then obviously talk to them.
Right.
When you talk with parents, you might have to use some non-technical terms, because what's the difference between negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement? From a parent, if you can help them understand that in a non-technical way and they can do things with that information, then that's great. Now, we're not training parents to be behavior analysts. We want them to do what works in our science to help their children or whoever they're working with.
Yeah. I hear so many conversations. You have to divorce yourself from certain terminology and making that the rock that we're going to go from. You want to get things done. We want to find out if they want to call it something else, as long as the implementation is a certain way and you can see that and it's implemented with treatment and it's helping things, then that's okay. They don't need to reply to you that this was a shaping procedure or this was a DRO. So it's mostly you being comfortable, you knowing behavior analysis, and you being able to then interact with others in a language using verbal behavior that is getting things done and in the best interests of the people that you're working with.
Yeah. Well, we're going to leave it with that, Doug, and I'm going to give
Okay.
the last secret word, which is dissonance. And with that being said, I would like to end this by saying we really appreciate you. We are, from the whole team, ABA on Call, which is myself, Doug, and Karen, who's back there on the dials, who's always helping us put out these excellent shows. We thank you for listening. And I do want to remind you all that we would love to interact with you. We'd love, if you have a question, if you have a comment, whatever, please reach out to us. And it's easy to get a hold of us. Just shoot an email to abaaoncall@centralreach.com. And if you want to give us topics, or we would love your feedback. But thank you for last year's patronage, and we look forward to bringing more ABA on Call to you this year in 2022. So on behalf of everyone, thank you for listening to this episode.
Thanks for watching this episode of ABA On Call. To get your CEU, follow the link and instructions below the video. You can enjoy the program again there, or you can go straight to the attendance verification quiz. Just enter the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate.